Hello, and thank you for joining me for the Shadowland Radio Show's Anthology 4. I hope that you enjoy the following stories along with the vintage commercials. I'm Dr. William Lester. Welcome to Blackwater Media.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
The Okefenokee is the largest swamp in North America. The swamp covers roughly 700 square miles and is located in the southeastern corner of Georgia, encompassing most of Charlton and Ware counties and parts of Brantley and Clinch counties. Now granted, some of those names might not mean much to those of you outside of the state, but for Georgia folk, well, you get it. The swamp has a distinctive and fascinating natural history. Cypress swamps, winding waterways, and floating peat mats are a major part of the Okefenokee's habitat mosaic. Wet and dry prairies, swamps dominated by shrubs, and forests of black gum and bay trees intersperse the array of other habitats. A high ridge of sand known as Trail Ridge forms the eastern edge of the swamp, and wildlife abound. More than 400 species of vertebrates, including more than 200 varieties of birds, and more than 60 kinds of reptiles are known to inhabit the swamp. But the Okefenokee is also a universe unto itself, and is known to harbor all manner of mystery, strange, unknown creatures, wandering phantoms, and visitors from the sky. Come with me now, if you dare, and explore the bizarre realities of the haunted Okefenokee. An unusual UFO was sighted on the east side of the swamp in May of 1998. The descriptions vary, but the sighting was observed over several miles in a north-to-south direction. The editor of a local newspaper gave a brief description of the UFO in an editorial. The UFO was described as a large, shiny black object, which hovered for some time, then broke apart into quite a few smaller objects, which flew away all in different directions. And no explanation has ever been given for the strange UFO. In early 1996, a former Everglades National Park ranger on a vacation from upstate New York visited Okefenokee's west side for canoeing and bird watching. He put his canoe in at Stephen Foster Park and paddled over to Billy's Island. He did not return to the par. His canoe was found that evening on Billy's Island. Federal, state, and local officials immediately started a search, which escalated over the next few days and weeks to an extremely extensive search for the man. Exhaustive searches of Billy's Island were conducted. Hand-to-hand searches, combing the entire island, turned up nothing. Bloodhounds were brought in. The hounds could not pick up a scent beyond a small loop, and they turned up nothing. Heat-seeking infrared helicopters were brought in, sensitive enough to identify small animals, and this man weighed over 300 pounds, and still they turned up nothing. Hope was almost given up until one day, some 40-plus days after the disappearance, a bedraggled man was seen by a boater leaning against a tree near the water's edge on Billy's Island. A day after this sighting, a dazed man identified himself to some passing canoeists as the missing man. Now, the man has never publicly stated that he was abducted. Speculation around the swamp is that he was taken without his knowledge from the island and then returned sometime after the search had been scaled down, with his memory seemingly erased. A classic UFO abduction. Back in the 1930s, a man was fishing along the tracks at Henson Creek near Manor. He fell asleep one night with the rails as his pillow. A train appeared, sounding its whistle frantically, but there was no response. Steel wheels kept on rolling, and the fisherman was killed. The legend holds that the body can be seen walking the rails at night, swinging a phantom lantern in search of its head. One man claims that his grandfather went in search of the ghost one night, and sure enough, it approached, solid white and 6 feet tall, walking directly toward the grandfather, who fired a futile shot before fleeing. A log cabin on Okefenokee's east side by an area called Camp Cornelia on Trail Ridge is the location of a haunting that took place in the early 1990s. A former refuge volunteer who resided in the cabin reported strange visitations of spirits. Now, these spirits were clearly Native Americans in full regalia. The spirits didn't seem to be aware of the walls and boundaries of the cabin, but seemed attached to the land the cabin was on. They seemingly went about their daily tribal existence without concern. In his book, This Magic Wilderness, author Robert Latimer Hearst relates the following. Traders Hill was a flourishing port for water trade in the frontier southeastern region. This small outpost community, compared to the surrounding settlements of the time, was an active metropolis. Begun as a trading post in 1755, the village about 5 miles south of Folkestone, Georgia, survived until the early 1900s on the river that once separated the royal colony of Georgia from the Spanish holdings and the Seminole nations to the south. At the end of Main Street stood a huge oak, the Hangman's Oak of Traders Hill. It was said the old oak could tell story upon story of mysterious events around the riverbank village. In the autumn of 1840, this massive tree played a major role in a mysterious drama, as reported by Troy Jones in the Charlton County Herald. An elderly Indian named Suwannee, accused of stealing some goods from the general store and of killing the owner, had been captured and placed in the town jail. If he escaped, he could swim 30 yards to safety. Therefore, he was well guarded. Escape into Florida from Traders Hill was frequently made good, since the St. Mary's River is only a short distance and very narrow at this point. Suwannee had prepared for this day. His grandfather, for whom the river Suwannee was named, it is said, had told him to starve himself until he could easily slip through the cell bars if he should ever become a prisoner of the white man. This he did, but his feebleness would not allow the old warrior freedom. After a speedy trial, he was carried out to the huge oak for execution. When the noose was placed around his neck, the Indian prayed. He then lifted his head and spoke, "May the curse of my father's spirit and mine be placed among the people as long as there is a Traders Hill." Not paying any heed to the defiant old warrior, the people, after hanging him, went on about their way. But all was not settled. One night, as the villagers were attending a county dance, a bright light cast its beam in the eyes of the merrymakers. Astonished, they looked toward this phenomenon. The gleam came from the oak. Accompanying the glow, a low moan whined through the countryside. Immediately, so writes Jones, people began to leave their homes and Traders Hill. Some who visit the Lonely Ridge today assert that on certain nights, the light can still be seen and the distant sound of moaning is still heard. Local legend around the Okefenokee Swamp holds that Spanish explorers who ventured into the vast area swore the forest turned into giant warriors who launched showers of arrows against them. Today, phantom deer, bears, and panthers that can only be killed by special bullets are said to roam the islands at night. And on stormy nights, ghost slave ships slip up the St. Mary's River amid sounds of clanking chains that can be heard by observers. Skeleton crews sail the boats up this winding waterway to unload their forbidden cargo on isolated sandbars. During the 1920s, a railroad was built to transport lumber out of the swamp. While crossing Floyd's Island, the largest in the swamp, it became necessary to cut through an extensive half-moon-shaped Indian mound. And within it, workers found the skeletons of several giant-sized men, accompanied by pottery and beads. Tom Chesser, who owned Chesser Island in Charlton County, had a sizable mound in his backyard. In 1969, he told the Atlanta Journal and Constitution that a professor from a northern university was brought in to excavate the mound in the 1920s. They discovered 13 skeletons in all. Chesser maintained that some of the skeletons were crossed, one on top of the other. Some were face down. All of them were perfect when they were first discovered. Teeth even still had some glaze on them, but when the air struck, it crumbled them. But they were giants. Those jawbones would go over my whole face. Chesser Island is now part of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. The Chesser Homestead is a part of the Refuge Systems Heritage Preservation Program. The Indian Mound itself is located on the grounds of the Chesser Homestead. As you may recall, I mentioned earlier Trail Ridge, the ancient geological feature which makes up the eastern boundary of the swamp. Well, back in January 1998, a traveler on vacation and hiking near the boardwalk area was surprised by the sound of drums in the distant piney woods. Native American specters carrying objects and walking swiftly in a single file line were sighted off in the distance, heading south on the ridge. He reported no sense of hostility, but felt uneasy, as if he were seeing something he should not be observing. Of course, the swamp has had its share of Bigfoot sightings. Such creatures have been spotted along isolated creeks that meander through the woods to the St. Johns River. Reports describe creatures as being up to 8 feet tall, very hairy, powerfully built, walking upright, with footprints up to 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, a pug nose, and smelling really bad. It sounds like Bigfoot to me. 2 farmers were deer hunting near the Waycross side of the swamp and observed a 7.5-foot tall creature covered with grayish-brown hair crossing the Southern Railroad tracks. The creature stopped and stared at them for a while, and they stared back. The large humanoid finally lumbered off, disappearing into the swamp. Several years before, a family visiting their grandmother's house at the Okefenokee Swamp was passing the time fishing, and suddenly the mother began screaming and pointing at this thing that was carrying away their string of fish. This story was later related to the Georgia Swamp Ape Research Center. He said he was 12 at the time, and he said that the creature was 30 yards in the distance, loping along the creek. The father shouted angrily at the animal and pursued it until he got close, and it turned around and screamed. The father turned and ran, and quickly gathered the family into the car and left. That night, the grandmother informed the family that she heard stuff around all the time, but stayed in the house at night. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. Between 1911 and 1912, an estimated 20 women were abducted and brutally murdered in Atlanta. It was reported that all the serial killer's victims were attractive black or biracial women from impoverished communities. According to a Baltimore Sun article, the women were also, quote, neatly dressed. Most of the women were abducted at night while walking alone. A vast majority of the victims were approached from behind, struck in the head, and transported to a more secluded location where they were tortured, mutilated, and ultimately killed. It was reported that most of the women were killed on Saturday nights, and their bodies were discovered the following day. Most of the victims were part of Atlanta's tight-knit black community, which formed amid ongoing racial tensions in the region. Although the state was plagued with race-related violence and persistent segregation, the black community worked together to build strong connections within their neighborhoods. At the time, no suspects were identified, and the women appeared to be chosen at random. The community became understandably frustrated with the media's apparent lack of interest in the crimes, and the authorities' failure to identify a viable suspect and make an arrest. Although the Atlanta Ripper seemingly vanished by 1912, and police eventually identified several suspects, the identity of the brutal killer was never conclusively proven, leaving the murders unsolved. The brutal nature of the murders led to a natural comparison between the Atlanta killer and London's Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper killed at least 5 women in 1888. Although he did not kill a large number of women, the sheer brutality of the murders gained worldwide attention. Jack the Ripper did not simply kill his victims. He tortured them and mutilated their bodies. Like Jack the Ripper, the Atlanta killer used a number of methods to torture, mutilate, and kill his victims. He was therefore dubbed the Atlanta Ripper. One of the victims, a girl named Lena Sharp's body was found near a set of railroad tracks. According to reports, her throat was slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Sadie Holly's throat was slashed as well. However, she also suffered multiple wounds to the head, which were inflicted with a large rock. Like the others, Addie Watt's throat was also cut, but she was also beaten about the head with a coupling pin, which fell off a train. The Atlanta Ripper also linked himself to Jack the Ripper on 2 different occasions. While assaulting one of his victims, the Ripper reportedly said, "Jack the Ripper ain't dead yet." The killer also left a number of handwritten letters taped to fireboxes throughout the city. The taunting letters, which said the killer would cut the throats of all Negro women, was signed Jack the Ripper. A girl named Mary Bell Walker, who was killed on May 27, 1911, is believed to be the Atlanta Ripper's first victim. Deaths and murders in the black community were rarely reported in newspapers in the early 1900s. However, Bell Walker's murder drew attention due to her stunning beauty and the sheer brutality of her death. The barbaric killings continued for several weeks, but authorities did not immediately realize they were dealing with a serial killer, and the media did not take enough interest in the killings to feature them on the front page until the body of the 8th victim was found. Sadie Holly, who was killed on July 10, 1911, was the first of the Atlanta Ripper's victims to appear on the front page of the Atlanta Constitution. Like several other victims, Sadie's throat was slashed, and her skull was crushed with a rock. Her body was found dumped in a nearby field. Although her shoes were missing, authorities did not find any evidence that would lead them to her killer. By the time authorities discovered Sadie's body, they were beginning to theorize that the murders were committed by the same person. An article published by the Baltimore Sun said the serial killer appeared to be, quote, experiencing an awful mania of a diseased mind. Although an estimated 20 women were killed by the Atlanta Ripper, 2 women managed to escape. 20-year-old Emma Lou Sharp became concerned when her mother failed to return home from the market when expected. As the Atlanta Ripper targeted women matching her mother's description, Emma Lou feared the worst. In an attempt to find her mother, she followed the path her mother would have taken from the market to their home. Along the way, she met a man who stepped onto the sidewalk and blocked her path. According to Emma Lou, the man said, "I never hurt girls like you." However, he then pulled out a knife and stabbed her in the back. Thankfully, she was not fatally wounded and managed to escape. Her mother, however, was found dead the following day. Emma Lou described her attacker as a tall black man with broad shoulders. She also noted that he was wearing a black hat with a wide brim. Days later, Mary Yadell was walking home from work when she heard someone whistling. Mary became alarmed when the person, who she also described as a tall black man, approached her in a threatening manner. She immediately began screaming for her boss, who rushed to the scene. However, the man who was believed to be the Atlanta Ripper managed to vanish without a trace. Although the Atlanta Ripper killings remain unsolved, authorities arrested multiple people and charged them with the murders. According to newspaper accounts, men named Henry Brown, John Daniel, Todd Henderson, Henry Huff, and Charlie Owens were all arrested and imprisoned for the Atlanta Ripper killings. However, only one of the men was convicted, and his conviction remains a point of heated controversy. John Daniel was released from jail as the killings continued after he was incarcerated. Although it has been suggested that he may have had a partner, there was no conclusive proof linking him to the crimes. Henry Brown, who confessed to the Atlanta Ripper killings, was acquitted when it was revealed that his confession was coerced. It is reported that Brown was beaten by police officers until he confessed to the crimes. Todd Henderson and Henry Huff were both tried for the Atlanta Ripper killings. However, they were both ultimately found not guilty. Charlie Owens was charged in only one of the killings attributed to the Atlanta Ripper. Although he was found guilty, the conviction remains controversial. It was reported that the murders continued for some time after Charlie Owens was incarcerated. Another suspect who was never arrested in the case was a man named Jim Conley. Conley, who fit the description given by witnesses and those who escaped the Atlanta Ripper, was identified as the killer by Detective W.J. Burns. However, nobody ever followed up on the accusations. In March 1912, a grand jury convened and concluded the Atlanta Ripper was a myth. It was reported that the grand jury determined the killings were each committed by a different man and were in no way related. They also determined the women were likely killed in a fit of jealousy after they were found to be engaging in, quote, immoral conduct. Although most of the murders attributed to the Atlanta Ripper were quite similar, critics argued that the region was notorious for violent crime. As none of the murders were solved, it is unknown whether there was one or more Atlanta Rippers, or how many of the killings were committed by a copycat. It's also unclear when the Atlanta Ripper killings began or when they actually stopped. It's widely believed that Mary Bell Walker, who was killed on May 27, 1911, was the Atlanta Ripper's first victim. However, a 1911 article in the Atlanta Constitution suggested the killings actually began in 1909. Although most sources report the Atlanta Ripper stopped killing in 1912, others suggest the Atlanta Ripper was active until 1915. Despite all of this, there can be no doubt that in the first decade and a half of the 20th century, a madman stalked the streets of Atlanta, tracking and killing African American women. Beyond that, the truth of the Atlanta Ripper may never be known. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. To enjoy more paranormal and cryptid stories, visit blackwatermedia.com to listen to a vast archive of material. While there, consider becoming a Blackwater Media Swamp Hunter Society member and access all available premium content. You can also visit the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. While there, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.
In my family, we think the wine you drink the most should be the best. We like Paul Masson's Burgundy. It's smooth and rich. We serve it to our friends, and now a lot of them are serving it to their friends. Why don't you join us? Next time you go shopping, you're choosing a wine, make it Paul Masson Burgundy. Paul Masson himself said it nearly a century ago. We will sell no wine before it's time.
In the mid to late 1800s, settlers streamed west across North America in great numbers. There were various reasons for this exodus from the east. Gold was discovered in California. Land on the frontier was cheap, if not completely free. And the belief in manifest destiny had taken root deep in the American psyche. Texas was considered a prime location for refugees from the east. The climate was good and the soil fertile. Stephen F. Austin, Green DeWitt, Martin de Leon, and other impresarios secured land grants, first from Spain, later from Mexico, parceled the property, and sold it off in large tracts to eager settlers. Once Texas had become independent from Mexico, immigration increased dramatically. One area that attracted both Anglo and Native American settlers was in East Texas, in an area that today makes up Tyler and Polk counties. The reasons these pioneers chose this area west of the Sabine River were obvious to anyone who visited. The region was rich in timber and water resources. The land was good for farming, and the forest was teeming with all types of game. It was a virtual paradise. In the summer of 1846, something altogether new was introduced to the area's settlers: fear. This fear motivated the pioneers to reject the dog-run style cabins preferred in other parts of Texas and instead construct new homes of the thickest logs that resembled miniature forts. Students of Texas history might assume the source of this fear was tension between the settlers and the Native American tribes in the area. Such was not the case, as the dominant tribe of the area, the Alabamas, were presided over by a chief called Kalita, who generally preferred a peaceful, even friendly relationship with the white settlers. Despite the friendly relationship between the area's pioneers and the Alabamas, the settlers never felt completely comfortable with their Native American neighbors, and rumors of marauding Indians from the outer edges of Kalita's kingdom spread like wildfire from time to time. Kalita presided over the Alabamas, but also acted as chief over a loose affiliation of tribes that included the Cushatas, Creeks, and Kickapoos. When such rumors surfaced, settlers would appoint a family member to serve as a watchman so that they would not be caught flat-footed by renegade Indians during the dark East Texas nights. It was during one of these times, when bands of marauding tribesmen were said to be in the area, that the legend of the Pebble Thrower of Peach Creek was born. The George Cottle family lived on Peach Creek, about a half-mile from the settlements called Peachtree Village. Having heard the rumors of roaming hostile Indians, George charged his 18-year-old son with taking the watch one hot night in August of 1846. The nervous youth began to hear movement sounds in the forest surrounding the family's cabin during the wee hours of the morning. The young Cottle could not see anything unusual in the dark woods, but continued to hear someone or something moving about. And suddenly an object of some kind struck the roof of the cabin. The teenager heard the object slowly roll down the eaves of the house and land on the sandy ground outside. Fearing this was some sort of Indian attempt to probe the cabin's defenses, the young man rushed to wake his father. Within minutes, the entire family was up and expecting the worst. A bit later, another small object struck the roof, rolled slowly down the sloped structure, and landed with a thump outside the cabin. This action was repeated multiple times throughout the night and was heard by the entire family. Mercifully, as the rays of dawn began to break through the towering trees of the East Texas forest, the activity ceased. Once it was fully daylight, the Caudles carefully stepped out of their cabin and inspected the area around the structure. The trees had long been cleared from the area immediately surrounding the home, making it impossible for anything to drop from them onto the roof. The front yard, as was the custom in those days, was kept grass and weed free and provided a sandy record of the tracks of any person or animal that visited the cabin. On that particular morning, there were no tracks of any kind. A search for the objects that struck the roof turned up nothing. The family was completely baffled. Around midday, George paid a visit to his nearest neighbors, a family by the name of Birchman. Caudle shared the story of the creepy goings-on of the previous night with his friend. Mr. Birchman replied, "That's funny. We had the same experience and about the same time. We couldn't find any tracks, but sure felt it was the Indians." The two men proceeded to the home of another neighbor, the Keys family. They too reported having endured a barrage of pebbles during the previous night. Upon further inquiry, families up and down Peach Creek reported having experienced the shenanigans of the pebble thrower at some point in the recent past. Over time, the stone throwing continued. Annoyance replaced fear among the pioneers as it became clear that whomever the pebble thrower was, he was more prankster than marauder. All assumed that some mischievous Indian was the culprit, and it was decided a visit to Chief Kalita was in order, in the hopes that he could put a stop to the disturbing incidents. Upon hearing the testimony of the settlers, Kalita seemed strangely unsurprised and more than a little amused at the plight of the homesteaders. He stated that it was highly unlikely the pebble thrower was an Indian. He acknowledged there were probably a few unsavory characters among his tribal coalition, then added, "But the Indian does not poke fun at the white man. If he likes you, he will not do that. If he does not like you, he has a better way of letting you know than throwing pebbles on the roofs of your homes." Kalita convinced the settlers that there was nothing he could do to stop the stone thrower, but there was likely nothing of which to be afraid. While the pioneers believed Kalita's assertion that Indians were not responsible, several left with the feeling that the chief knew more about what might actually be happening than he let on. Whatever the case, the rock throwing continued. Week after week, month after month, and year after year, the assault continued on the cabins of settlers up and down Peach Creek. The pebble thrower never left tracks, and the projectiles themselves were only rarely found. The pebble thrower of Peach Creek might have been a mischievous youth of native or Anglo origin. That would be the simplest and least disturbing explanation. It is worth mentioning, however, that the heavily forested regions of East Texas, West Louisiana, Southwest Arkansas, and Southeast Oklahoma have long traditions of wild man Sasquatch encounters. Two, Bigfoot lore is rife with incidents where these North American wood apes have reportedly hurled projectiles at or near people. The most famous example is no doubt the Ape Canyon incident that allegedly took place in the remote forests of Washington in 1924. However, literally hundreds of other projectile throwing events have been documented over the years. Incidents that are eerily similar to those experienced by homesteaders along Peach Creek so long ago continue to be reported to this very day. Could the pebble thrower of Peach Creek have been a Sasquatch? Many would find such a hypothesis laughable. But as someone who has been holed up inside a cabin in a remote and heavily wooded location during such a barrage of rocks, I do not. If there's anything to the Bigfoot phenomena, the possibility should be considered. Should you ever find yourself awakened in the middle of the night by a loud impact on the roof of the cabin in which you're living or vacationing, you likely have nothing to fear other than the loss of a good night's sleep. However, I would recommend inspecting the roof of the structure the next morning. Should you find rocks resting there, you might reconsider your plans before staying a second night. After all, rocks cannot fly onto roofs, and they do not fall from trees. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. To enjoy more paranormal encrypted stories, visit blackwatermedia.net to listen to a vast archive of material. While there, consider becoming a Blackwater Media Swamp Hunter Society member and access all available premium content. You can also visit the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. While there, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. The metropolitan Atlanta area is home to over 6 million people. But these are by no means the city's only residents. Atlanta is also the home of innumerable phantoms, demons, haunts, specters, and even vampires. So come with me now on an exploration of haunted Atlanta. One of the most haunted places in Atlanta is the Thornton House. Built in 1784, this historical landmark can attribute much of its paranormal activity to the ghost of a preteen girl. Many witnesses experience cold spots and have actually seen her on the staircase. According to the staff, she causes strange gusts and extinguishes candles. According to the book Ghosts of Atlanta, Phantoms of the Phoenix City, she's the jealous type. Anytime a teen girl is in the house, she pulls the poor girl's hair. The Ellis Hotel had a massive fire destroy its halls in 1946, claiming the lives of 119 people. The hotel didn't have any fire doors, fire alarms, or sprinklers. The firemen's ladders only reached the 8th floor, and the safety nets couldn't withstand the force of jumpers from over 70 feet. Many died trying to escape from the flames by jumping from the windows, while others were burned alive. The bodies of those who jumped from the higher floors were scattered along the sidewalks and in the back alley. The Atlanta Fire Department fought the flames for 2.5 hours. This tragedy is what led to many changes in building codes and fire safety ordinances. The staff and a remarkable number of visitors have all reported hearing the heartbreaking cries and wails of women and children throughout the hotel. Many have even seen full-bodied apparitions. It's also common for the fire alarms to go off at exactly 2:48 a.m., which is when the 1946 fire broke out. In Midtown Atlanta is the former Excelsior Mill that was built in 1890. During its operation, many accidents occurred, and one even led to death. Hubert Neal became caught in a conveyor belt and was killed on July 17, 1899. As if this wasn't enough for a haunting, it got a creepy makeover when it was turned into a pizzeria with a quaint little movie theater in the 1970s. Then in 1988, the place was turned into Masquerade, a nightclub and concert venue which apparently has attracted the likes of vampires. First, frequenters of Masquerade allegedly saw a tall, shadowy figure of a man lurking the grounds late at night. They began to believe he was a vampire. Rumor has it that more vampires have since flocked to Masquerade and actually frequent the place now. Atlanta's Georgia Aquarium exhibits hundreds of species and thousands of animals across the 7 major galleries, all of which reside in more than 11 million gallons of water. Once the Georgia Aquarium began housing artifacts from the Titanic in 2008, reports of paranormal activity started pouring in. People were being touched, hearing voices, becoming overcome with intense emotions, and seeing shadowy figures dart by. One Georgia Aquarium volunteer who wished to remain anonymous said, "I could feel a hand moving over my head and through my hair." The ghosts became so active that Sci-Fi Channel's ghost hunters came to investigate. They reportedly experienced cold spots, witnessed a shadowy figure and picked up a voice saying, "No, please wait," in the iceberg room. The Roswell, Georgia paranormal team came in for a 2-day investigation as well. They too witnessed the same shadowy figures, and so many others have reported that they also captured recordings of ethereal voices. The famous Fox Theater opened on Christmas Day in 1929, and myths have molded themselves around it ever since. Everything from claims of breakfast cereal being in the plaster to allegations of stolen treasure hiding in its catacombs have been topics of speculation for locals. On the more spooky end of the spectrum are the stories of the Fox Theater being haunted. People have claimed to see shadowy figures inside the theater and the face of a Confederate soldier looking out from the windows. A former owner claimed to see the apparition of a man walking down the aisle when he knew he was alone. One of the managers back in the 1940s lived on the 4th floor of the building with his girlfriend. When his girlfriend was found dead, it was ruled an accident. Ever since then, the lights turned themselves off and on, and the backstage elevators heads toward the 4th floor, no matter what button the occupant has pushed. Atlanta's second oldest home, Meadow Nook, is believed to be haunted by original owner Colonel Alston and an unknown Civil War soldier. Nobody knows which of these men is the helpful one and which is the troublemaker, but there does seem to be two very different personalities at play there. Meadow Nook was built by Colonel Robert A. Alston and underwent modern-day restorations. Current owners have claimed a spirit has taken to breaking their dishes and rearranging their family photos or placing them face down. Their son is scared to sleep in the upstairs bedroom because he would wake up to what felt like someone sitting on his chest and pinning him down. The wife claims that one time she was searching for olives in the kitchen and was about to call her husband to pick up some when a cabinet opened by itself and a can of olives rolled out. She said, "It gives me chill bumps now. I just about died." Atlanta's oldest and largest final resting place is the Oakland Cemetery. Dating back to 1850, the grounds hold some 70,000 internments, 3,000 of which belong to unknown soldiers. 27 Atlanta mayors are buried there, along with the Gone with the Wind author Margaret Mitchell. Much of the paranormal activity seems to be centralized to the section of the Confederate soldiers. Full-bodied apparitions of troops have been seen, and one witness was startled by the image of a soldier hanging from one of the trees. A disembodied voice reading a roll call of the Confederate dead has been heard by a few people. Sometimes a muffled "present" can be heard in response. The Beverly Hills Inn in Atlanta may not be the most hospitable in town. This was once a home for elderly women, and is believed that at least 3 of them still call it home. The spirits are not shy about putting rude guests in their place. They are prone to throwing glasses at guests and creepily growling at people to get out. There have also been numerous reports of orbs, strange fogs, and apparitions appearing inside the guest rooms, especially on the 3rd floor. The entire region surrounding Kennesaw Mountain is riddled with residual energy from the Civil War. In fact, it's considered the most actively haunted area of the entire metro region. One witness was driving through the park with his son when they spotted a ghostly rider in front of them. The spirit was clearly that of a Union Army cavalry officer and was heading right for them. The anonymous driver recalled in an interview, "I quickly locked down my brakes as the horse proceeded to come right in front of us." He went on to describe how the rider simply went straight through a fence and faded away. "My son and I were in a state of almost sheer panic, but we managed to maintain and get on the way home very quickly." Paranormal activity also plagues the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse. Things like unexplained light anomalies, shadowy figures, and disembodied voices occur often. There are at least 3 different apparitions seen regularly: a young boy in a blue velvet suit, an older man, and a woman dressed in Elizabethan clothing. The man apparently just wanders the halls, but the woman likes to rearrange things in the dressing rooms and switch props around to cause confusion. Other supernatural activities include doors closing, muffled voices, and cold spots. The Pope Walton House, which used to be Anthony Fine's dining, has been the site of strange activity for many years. There are reports of cold spots, kitchenware flying across the room on its own, and lights mysteriously turning off and on. According to former staff and guests of the antebellum mansion, phantom children can be heard singing and playing. Also, an apparition of a woman has been seen on numerous occasions. Rhodes Hall, or the Castle on Peachtree, was built back in 1904 by Amos Rhodes. It's said that Rhodes' spirit, along with his wife, still linger there. Amanda Rhodes can be heard walking in the halls and is known to mess with the lights. Several people have seen a tall man they believe is Amos himself. Others have reported hearing the sounds of children laughing throughout the house, and some have even seen them appear and disappear. Supposedly, a malevolent presence lurks in the basement. Those who have seen it describe it as a dark figure with evil radiating from it. In Lawrenceville, the ghost of a man wrongfully put to death is still heard singing to the love he left behind. What we know of this story comes from Judge Richard D. Wynn, who confessed to his part in the tragedy some 40 years after it happened. Wynn's 1883 article in the Gwinnett Herald begins by describing Colonel James Austin as a drunk who was wanting in humanity for partaking in slave trading. One night in 1848, Austin burst into his kitchen to find a married slave couple, Ellick and Betsy. Austin grabbed Betsy, but Ellick fought back, tearing Austin off his wife. Enraged that a slave would have the audacity to contradict his intentions, Austin chased the slave while wildly swinging a sword. Ellick scrambled into a cabin loft. Cornered and fearing for his life, Ellick fatally stabbed his master 9 times in self-defense. As Austin lay dead before him, Ellick chose not to run. He went straight to the courthouse to explain the unfortunate death of Colonel James Austin. But instead of being rewarded for his honesty, Judge Wynn sentenced Ellick to hang. Writing almost 4 decades later, Wynn questioned whether Ellick's punishment fit his crime, asking, if he'd been a free man, if he'd been a white man, would it not have been classified as justifiable homicide? Today you will find indentations in the back of one cell where Ellick tried to carve his way to freedom. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. What comes to mind when you hear the word werewolf? For many people, the term conjures images of howling, bloodthirsty monsters prowling the moors in search of human prey. Thoughts of silver bullets, the full moon, and the painful and horrific transformation of a man into an inhuman beast may come to mind. Many people consider the werewolf to be a European myth that has become part of Western popular culture only via television, comics, and movies. And they would be wrong. Texas and Louisiana actually have quite a rich tradition of werewolf and other shape-shifting creature legends. While there are almost certainly elements of truth to them, it's often impossible to separate what is fact from what is myth and hyperbole. One of the more fascinating Texas legends is the tale of the Beast of Bear Creek. Older residents of the Texas Hill Country may be familiar with the story of the Beast of Bear Creek. It was widely believed among the early settlers of Kimball County that an old Native American shaman, among the last survivors of his tribe, had the ability to change from his normal human form into that of a large wolf. The old medicine man, it was said, would seek revenge on the white men who had decimated his tribe by transforming into his wolf persona and roaming the countryside at night, killing everything from livestock to unfortunate settlers who were caught outside after dark. Tales of shapeshifters and skinwalkers permeate the folklore of many Native American tribes. But what makes this particular example unusual is that many of the white settlers of Kimball County, in particular those near the old town of Clio, believed the story to be 100% true. So much so that the image of the Beast of Bear Creek, as the monster became known, was immortalized in solid rock. A man named N.Q. Patterson, who lived in Kimball County during the time when the Beast of Bear Creek roamed the countryside, was a man of many talents. At one time or another, he served as the county treasurer, county judge, and tombstone carver. It was his skill as a stone cutter and sculptor for which he is remembered to this day. Patterson apparently was unable to satisfy his artistic bent by carving tombstones, so he took to carving figures into the limestone cliffs and bluffs near and around Bear Creek. Of the many images created by Patterson, one in particular has become quite well known. Dubbed the Clio face due to its proximity to the town of the same name, the large carving depicted a strange and fierce creature. The figure seemed part human and part animal. The nose was broad and protruded more than that of a person. The lips of the creature were curled back in a vicious snarl that revealed terrible fangs with which it could no doubt do terrible harm. The carving was quite large and became very well known in the region. Many came to the conclusion that this was a representation of the old shaman in his wolf guise, the Beast of Bear Creek. Had Patterson seen the monster himself? Was he merely basing his carving on the legends he'd heard, or was the Clio face merely a manifestation of Patterson's fertile imagination? If N.Q. Patterson ever revealed the answer to these questions, no one was ever able to find documentation of it. The Kimball County area continues to be a source of some strange creature reports. These days, they typically don't involve werewolves and/or shapeshifters. Rather, modern-day witnesses are reporting out-of-place mountain lions, black panthers, and the odd-looking hairless bluish-gray canines often dubbed chupacabras by the media. Lost livestock is blamed on one of these culprits more often than not. Odd screams and howls still heard by the rural residents of the area, more often than outsiders would guess, are simply dismissed as coyotes. And to my knowledge, no one has ever reported a sighting of the beasts of Bear Creek for a very long time. And this is not surprising, considering that the town of Clio is now all but a ghost town. All that remains of the settlement is the rickety structure that was once the Clio General Store, directly across Highway 2291. A building that, according to the sign over the door, once served as the Bear Creek Community Center. The people are all gone now, of course. And whatever the beast of Bear Creek was, will probably never be known. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. Have you ever heard of the Plaid Eye? Well, if not, I'll tell you. And afterwards, you'll probably wish you'd never heard a word about it. The Plaid Eye is a malicious, ghostly black dog from the folklore of the West Indies, South Carolina, and my own home state of Georgia. Plaid Eyes wander lonely roads, sometimes restricted to their own grave sites in the shape of an animal. Most often this animal is a dog with blazing eyes. It could almost manifest as the ghost of the human it once was. A cat, a cow, or a person with no head. At other times, the spirit was invisible except for its fiery eyes, which were considered the best way to identify an animal as being a disguised Plaid Eye. Sometimes the spirit takes no shape at all, only a freezing, suffocating mist. Now, a Plaid Eye is created whenever a person dies without a proper burial or is buried carelessly, unsettling their spirit. The angry ghost of the person manifests as a malevolent, shape-shifting being that harasses the people who fail to bury it decently. At other times, it's the remnants of a person who has unfinished business on earth and wants to cause trouble, or died unjustly and wishes to avenge its own death. It wanders the place of its burial, unable to find rest, and terrorizing anyone who passes by. Unlike many black dog spirits, the Plaid Eye is purely malevolent, or at least vengeful. Sometimes it only seeks justice and the punishment of those who wronged it in life. But at other times, it's simply a killer. Its appearances are linked to the new moon. In some sources, only people born with a caul over their heads could see the Plaid Eye in its true form. Plaid Eyes bent on vengeance would exclusively hunt the people that they blamed for their deaths, but others were more indiscriminate in their choice of prey. If a person encountered a Plaid Eye, the spirit would begin to grow to an immense size, eventually enveloping and consuming the victim. At other times, the Plaid Eye follows the person without doing any harm. Sometimes it would harass and torment them, driving them insane. Especially powerful Plaid Eyes could suck out the human soul. The Platt-Eye could shapeshift and grow, like I said, to an impossible size, which is how it caught its victims. The only way to stop a Platt-Eye was to find the corpse of the person it once was and give it a proper burial. This would cause the spirit to end its quest for vengeance and move on. At other times, the punishment of the person who killed or otherwise offended the Platt-Eye's living form would calm the creature. If you ever want to encounter this evil specter, and I can assure you, you don't, remember this: avoid derelict graveyards, isolated back roads, and lonely, seldom used trails or paths, especially at night. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.
You'll be glad this winter you bought a Coleman heater this fall. Yes, as you sit back in your easy chair, snug and comfortable, you'll be glad you bought a Coleman heater. You'll enjoy floor-to-ceiling warmth in those rooms you could never heat before.
Get your Coleman oil or gas heater now during Coleman's big bonus sale. Here's what you get.
First bonus, a new low price.
Yes, now you can get a dependable Coleman automatic heater at a new low price.
Second bonus, a new low operating cost.
Coleman saves you up to 25% on heating bills because Coleman gives you maximum heat from your fuel.
Third bonus, a 32-piece set of Libby's Safe Edge glassware worth $14. It's free with your new Coleman heater.
Get 3 big bonuses. Get your Coleman oil or gas heater now during Coleman's big bonus sale. This sale is for a limited time only.
So see your Coleman dealer tomorrow. You'll find his name and address in your telephone directory.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. Converse, Texas is not the kind of place one would normally associate with a monster sighting. The town, while small, it encompasses only 6.3 square miles, is now densely populated and heavily developed. Sitting only 15 miles to the northeast of downtown San Antonio, it's become hard to discern where Converse ends and the Alamo City begins. It's known for many things these days: great Mexican food, the Judson High School Rockets football team, and Randolph Air Force Base, to name a few. Converse, however, was not always so developed and civilized. Like most of Bexar County, it was once not much more than arid plains, rocks, cactus, and chaparral scrubland. Such lonesome country often holds secrets. The area that was to become Converse is no exception. It's said that back in the mid to late 1800s, a rancher moved on to a plot of land near what is now Converse. The man was a rugged sort who had grown up in true pioneer fashion. Some versions of the tale suggest he was a military combat veteran who moved to the area in an effort to put the horrors of the Civil War behind him and live out his days quietly on the South Texas plains. This man had a son who was something of a disappointment to him. The boy was frail, bookish, and preferred studying to wrangling and hunting. This frustrated the old rancher to no end, and he decided to, quote, make a man out of the boy. To this end, the rancher decided to send his son out hunting. He hoped that the boy would take a liking to the sport and after making his first kill, would prefer the more manly activity of hunting to that of reading and studying all day. The old man put a long gun in the boy's hands and instructed him to go out and shoot a deer. The family needed meat after all. He directed the boy to hunt a heavily wooded area along a creek called Skull Crossing. The boy was reluctant at first and resisted. One way or the other, he was finally coerced into going. The old rancher watched with high hopes as his son walked away from the homestead toward the woods. The old man would soon be disappointed, however, as his son returned a few hours later empty-handed. When chastised for returning without any game, the boy told his father that he left the area out of fear as he had spotted and been stalked by a monster resembling a werewolf. The father immediately dismissed this wild story and cajoled his son into returning to the area to finish the hunt. The boy did not want to go, but his father left him no choice. Trembling and fearful, the boy trudged back out to the ominously named area of Skull Crossing. Little did the old rancher know it would be the last time he would see his son alive. Hours passed, and darkness began to fall. The old man, the story goes, began to worry and have second thoughts about sending his inexperienced son out into the woods alone. While he hoped the reason the boy had not returned was because he had yet to make a kill, he began to have a sinking feeling deep in his gut that something was wrong. Deciding not to wait any longer, the rancher rounded up some neighbors and they made their way toward the wooded area near Skull Crossing in search of the boy. What they found upon arriving there is the stuff of nightmares. The search party happened upon a monstrous, hairy creature hunched over the body of the rancher's son. The beast was in the act of ravenously devouring the boy when discovered. The men got off a few shots at the monster, but it bounded away at lightning speed. The werewolf, as it was dubbed, was described as standing between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur. Members of the search party described it as being some kind of unholy combination between a wolf and a man. The old rancher was understandably devastated by the death of his boy. He blamed himself for not believing his son's story and believed he sent him out to his doom by forcing him to return to Skull Crossing to complete his hunt. The versions of the tale I've generally heard say that the rancher died shortly thereafter. Some versions say he had become reclusive, refused to eat, and wasted away. Others say that he committed suicide by setting fire to his own home and burning up. Either way, it was a sad end all the way around. Did this event actually occur? You won't find any old newspaper accounts documenting the incident. I've looked and came up empty. Somehow, though, the tale has lived on for more than a century. Should the story be dismissed as an old campfire story? A myth? I'm not so sure. There are similar stories involving werewolves and other hairy-covered monsters that live on in the folklore of the region. The story of the Wild Woman of the Navidad, Bear King of Marble Falls, the legend behind Woman Hollering Creek, the Hairy Man of Round Rock, and the mysterious limestone carving dubbed the Cleo Face, all allude to old tales of beasts of similar appearance. Of course, much folklore has a basis in truth. It's possible that the legend of the converse werewolf has its genesis in an actual event. Some believe that if a young boy was killed near Skull Crossing, it was likely the result of an attack by an animal, much more mundane than a werewolf. That's fair enough, but it fails to take into account the description given by the men who spied the beast. The animal was described as bipedal, covered in hair, 8 to 9 feet tall, and lightning fast. Whatever the animal was, it was not a mundane member of the local fauna. In fact, the description attributed to the animal, if given today, would immediately bring to mind images of what is now known as Dogman, or even the Sasquatch. Many Bigfoot enthusiasts seek to dismiss the idea that the converse werewolf might have been a wood ape. No doubt this is because of the alleged death of a human being at the hands of the said beast. Others are not so quick to dismiss the possibility that a Sasquatch is the villain behind the legend. Most who entertain the idea that the North American wood apes might exist speculate that their diet is likely similar to that of black bears. Black bears do subsist mainly on plant matter, berries, roots, and nuts, to name just a few. Black bears also indulge in eating insects, grubs, birds, and mammals when the opportunity presents itself. While rare, black bears do occasionally hunt humans for the express purpose of devouring them. If wood apes exist, and if their diet is indeed similar to that of black bears, then it would not be out of the realm of possibility that a hungry Sasquatch might take advantage of a situation where there was an easy meal to be had. Admittedly, this is contrary to the behavior most often reported by witnesses who claim to have seen Bigfoot. Most witnesses report that these creatures, once they realize they've been spotted, simply retreat back into the forest and make themselves scarce. It must be acknowledged, though, that tales of cannibalism and abductions have been associated with these creatures since time immemorial. Many Native Americans feared Sasquatches and believed they would snatch a wayward member of the tribe when given the opportunity. One simply cannot, in my view, use ancient Native American tales as supporting evidence that the Sasquatch is real, while ignoring the other details of the legend. People continue to disappear in the wild places of North America to this day, some under very odd circumstances. Many are never found. Most, no doubt, simply get lost and die of exposure, dehydration, etc. Others are likely the victims of foul play, of the very human variety. Could a small minority of the missing be victims of abduction at the hands of Sasquatch? The legendary accounts of Albert Osman, Mushalat Harry, along with the First Nations legends, suggests it's at least a possibility. The story of the converse werewolf is slowly fading away now. Sophisticated suburbanites have little time for such tales. As the years pass, fewer and fewer South Texans hear of the legend. Even those who have heard the story tend to dismiss it as folklore. It is a scary story to be told around a campfire or at Halloween, and nothing more. To those of us who pursue these creatures and venture into the deepest forests and remote places in North America, the story has a different meaning. It's a cautionary tale. Fact or fiction, it reminds us to take nothing for granted, to always be careful and aware of our surroundings. You might well suppose that we'll never really know what, if anything, happened at Skull Crossing all those years ago. And I'd be inclined to agree with you. Did a young boy really die? Did a grief-stricken and guilt-ridden father join his son in death soon thereafter? The truth, I'm afraid, has been buried along with the early residents of Bexar County. Maybe it's best it remains there. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. The telling of scary stories around a campfire is a tradition that is likely nearly as old as mankind itself. While tales of ghosts, goblins, and murderous psychopaths can rattle the cage of nearly anyone, what better subject for a campfire story could there be than a cannibalistic and murderous Sasquatch? The story of a haunted house might be creepy, but unless you're actually staying in the house in question, it is easily and quickly forgotten once the marshmallows and chocolate and graham crackers appear at the fire. Tales of a creature many people regard as being real, stalking the very woods in which you've pitched your tent, however, are not always so easy to put aside. One such terrifying tale is the story of a Bigfoot war that allegedly took place in eastern Oklahoma during the mid-1850s. The story of the LeFlore County Bigfoot War is one that I've heard bits and pieces of through the years. So let's take a look at the story and see what we can find out. It's said that in or around 1855, a band of Choctaws in what is now LeFlore County and farmers in what is now Arkansas were experiencing some terrifying events. It all began in a rather benign way when the theft of vegetables, a few head of livestock, and other foodstuff by stealthy bandits in the night. The thieves were cagey, quiet, and never seen. They were also smart, as somehow they never ventured into Choctaw encampments on the nights when the watchman was in place. Neither did the bandits ever fall into the trap set for them by farmers outside of Indian territory. Those charged with finding and capturing these marauders began to develop a begrudging respect for the wiliness of their adversaries as time went by and the petty thefts continued. While the thefts were annoying and did cause some hardships, neither the Choctaw or the neighboring Anglo farmers were afraid of the food bandits. However, things changed once women and children began to go missing. Spurred by reports of these kidnappings, a group of 30 Choctaw cavalrymen were organized to hunt down the abductors. The group was led by Joshua LeFlore, a man of mixed Choctaw and French blood who was deeply respected by his fellow tribesmen. Also joining the search party was a Choctaw warrior named Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons. The Tubbies were huge men, all approaching 7 feet in height and weighing in at more than 300 pounds each, and were regarded as fierce warriors and expert horsemen. The Tubbies were so effective in mounted warfare that despite their massive size, they became known as the Light Horsemen. This contingent of searchers, armed to the teeth, set out into the region known today as the McCurtain County Wilderness Area to search for the kidnappers. After riding all day, the searchers finally arrived in the area where they believed the bandits to be hiding. LeFlore brought his troops to a halt, stood up in his stirrups, and surveyed the area with a spyglass. It is unclear exactly what LeFlore saw, but whatever it was, he ordered his men to charge toward a stand of pines roughly 500 yards distant. LeFlore and the Tubby men led the attack. As the troops closed the distance between themselves and the stand of pines where the kidnappers were thought to be hiding, they were assaulted by a tremendous stench, the unmistakable odor of decay and decomposition. The horses of most of the men began to buck and rear, tossing their riders. Only the mounts of LeFlore and the Tubby men were disciplined enough to remain composed, allowing the 8 men to continue through the pines. As the men cleared the small wooded patch, they came upon a large earthen mound. Scattered across the mound were the bodies of children and women in various stages of decomposition. LeFlore and the Tubbies caught a glimpse of a number of the murderers fleeing into the tree line on the opposite side of the mound. Only 3 of the killers stood their ground to meet the charge of the Light Horsemen. It was at this time that the cavalrymen realized they were not going up against any human foe. Rather, standing before them, snarling and beating their chests, were 3 huge, hairy-covered creatures. Despite what must have been a shocking sight, LeFlore drew his pistol and saber, spurred his mount, and charged. As LeFlore approached the nearest ape, it took a mighty swipe and struck his horse in the head, killing it instantly. LeFlore managed to roll off the falling horse, quickly jumping to his feet, and fired multiple shots into the chest of the creature. Once his pistol was empty, LaFleur attacked the ape with his saber, opening up gaping wounds on the animal, which roared in rage and pain. LaFleur's assault on the creature was so quick, and the shock of seeing hair-covered monsters so great, that the Tubby men hesitated, completely stupefied, before entering the fray. This delay allowed one of the other two apes to get behind LaFleur, who was intensely focused on the ape he had engaged. The second beast grabbed LaFleur's head with two huge hands and ripped it from his shoulders. The horrible sight jolted the Tubby warriors into action, and they opened fire on the three Sasquatches with .50 caliber Sharps buffalo rifles. Two of the beasts were killed instantly, dropping in their tracks. The third creature was wounded but turned and fled till the lethal shot could be fired. Robert Tubby, only 18 years old but already 6'11" and well over 300 pounds, spurred his horse, ran down the injured ape, and dispatched him with his hunting knife. As the rest of the troop, after gathering their panicked horses, joined them, the light horsemen surveyed the area. The bodies of dead women and children, mostly partially devoured, littered the area. The smell of decay, along with the terrible odor of the beast's feces, caused many of the men to vomit. After composing themselves, the men gathered the remains of the unfortunate women and children and buried them. They also buried their leader, Joshua LaFleur. As for the three ape-like monsters, their bodies were placed upon a huge bonfire and burned. Their hellish task complete, the Choctaw warriors returned to Tuskahoma, where it's said that the mighty Tubby men were plagued by terrible nightmares for years afterward. It's one hell of a story. But is any of it true? We do know that the Tubbies existed. So too did a man named Joshua LaFleur. You won't find any official documents that LaFleur died in battle. In fact, outside of the realm of folklore, there's virtually no information to establish that the LaFleur County Bigfoot War took place at all. Having said that, it is possible that the LaFleur County incident was actually based on a real event that took place in a different location. According to a Bigfoot researcher named Jim King, the answer might be yes. King believes the LaFleur County story is based on an event that took place much farther west in Kiowa territory, an event related to him by an Indian elder. According to the story, Kiowa women were placed in a special teepee or tent on the edge of the camp when they started their menstrual cycle. The women stayed there being tended to only by older women until their cycle was complete. The elder told King that women were considered unclean during their cycles, and Kiowa warriors were not only forbidden any physical contact with females during this time, they were not allowed to even look upon them. This seems a bit harsh, of course, but it's not too different than the way many cultures treated menstruating women in the past. The elder said that once long ago there had been trouble with ape-like creatures who were attracted by the scent and pheromones emanating from the tent where the menstruating women were housed. Since the tent was on the edge of the encampment, it proved to be an easy target for renegade apes who were said to have entered and carried off women on several occasions. To make a long story short, the Kiowa leadership decided that this was unacceptable and put together a group of warriors to hunt down the kidnappers. The searchers did manage to track an ape back to its lair and killed not only it, but the entire family unit. Could the LaFleur County story have its roots in the tale told to Jim King by the Kiowa elder? Is there any truth at all, even the smallest grains, in either tale? I've heard that many put their faith in the LaFleur County version simply due to the name of the unfortunate Joshua LaFleur. They wouldn't have named the county after him if it wasn't true, and other similar statements abound. I, however, have not been able to find anything saying LaFleur County was named after Joshua LaFleur. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society website, the name honors the prominent LaFleur family of the Choctaw Nation. Could Joshua LaFleur have been one of the prominent LaFleur family? It's certainly possible, but there does not seem to be any documentation singling out Joshua or his actions as the reason for the naming of the county. The story of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War, even if totally fictional, does seem to point to the fact that enormous hair-covered ape-like animals have been thought to reside in the region for a very long time. a time long before the Patterson-Gimlin film brought Bigfoot into America's consciousness. Add to this the beliefs of many other Native American tribes from across the North American continent, who have long told stories of these creatures snatching women and children, and the anecdotal evidence that grows taller. Truth be told, the idea of child or a woman snatching Sasquatches continues to thrill, terrify, and enthrall us to this very day. It may very well be that the tale of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War was inspired by actual less dramatic events, like the Ape Canyon incident. Over the years, such a story would be embellished and grow to mythic proportions. It is all but inevitable, as a good scary story is irresistible. Don't be too hard on those who might have added to the original facts. After all, we all know that the most frightening types of campfire stories will always have one thing in common. They could really happen. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. This story was originally published on the Texas Cryptid Hunter website, which can be found at texascryptidhunter.blogspot.com. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.